Hello, all. Welcome to Mayhem, Murder, and the Macabre. I'm Jennifer,
And I'm Angie.
and we have changed things up just a little bit this week in case you haven't noticed. We decided that if we switched where we filmed in the room, we're at Angie's house, that not only did we have a beautiful backdrop with the fireplace, we would be warm.
You can't really see it that much because our chairs
kind of get in the way, but
it is a nice warm fire.
Yeah, so now you guys don't have to watch us be all bundled up and so anything to discuss?
I don't know. Murdoch trial started this week.
Big week in the state of South Carolina, yes.
Yeah, I don't know that a whole lot has come out of it yet. I don't know. I'm not hearing a lot of good news nor bad news.
So my husband said you and I should go down and be a part of it and podcast from there.
I agree.
Which would have been a great idea, except without having a press pass, you weren't getting in. And they were very
still stand out there.
Limited numbers. Well, that's what he said. He was like, okay, so go to, cast from the steps of the...
Exactly.
So, anyway, I don't know. I'm struggling. And, of course, we will cover this story for those of you that aren't familiar with it. I think most everybody is. But if you haven't been keeping up with it, we will cover the story at some point. Unfortunately, I'm concerned that there's going to be... I think the case should have been moved completely out of the Low Country.
I agree.
I have my doubts that there can be a fair trial. And when I say a fair trial, I actually mean a jury that will convict a Murdaugh in the Low Country. Mm-hmm. They are very far-reaching. And the trial is actually taking place, if I'm not mistaken, in the county where the murders happened. It's not the county that the Murdaughs lived in.
It's called Colleton County.
Colleton County, which is where the family where Moselle is located. And Moselle is where it's the family land where the murders occurred. They worked and lived in their everyday lives in what's the county? Hampton County. Thank you. I went blank. In Hampton County. So these two counties are not that far apart. Right. The power of this family is pretty far-reaching. So I just am kind of, I don't know, if he gets a fair trial as far as a conviction on what I personally believe he did, then that'll be fine. And maybe it means that the justice system in South Carolina is getting a long-needed overhaul. We'll see. Be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think they said it'd take about 4 weeks. They're expecting about a 4-week trial.
250 witnesses to be called. So it's going to be a long one, I think.
Mm-hmm. Should be interesting. Should be interesting.
It's on Court TV every day if you want
to watch it.
Yes,
if you want to make sure that you are in the know. Just on my phone. Oh, okay. So, also, I'm in glasses today. I normally wear my contacts, but I had something in my left eye that felt like grit. I think it's allergy related, but until that's gone, I'm not putting contacts back in my eyes. So you guys get to see me in my glasses.
But
Sorry.
She looks so cute.
Everybody keeps telling me that, and I'm like, they're just like glasses, $20 from Zenni, you know.
I think the color is fun. So
the color is fun. Well, and that was it. I said if I'm going to wear glasses, they're going to be fun. So I have this pair. I have a light. This is more of a teal. I have a really light blue pair, and then I have a purple pair. Mm-hmm. My husband says the purple pair reminds him of Sally Jesse Raphael, so those are the ones I wear at home.
Except she wore red glasses.
She did wear red glasses.
Does he know that?
He does, but I think they're larger. And I did tell him, he's like, they're like 80s glasses. And I'm like, yes, I know, they're a bit larger frame. But when I watch TV, with them being larger, there's not that, sometimes with glasses, like I can look over the top of these or whatnot. I can't see at a distance.
He needs to stop making fun of your glasses. I was going to say your purple glasses, but then I was going to be... He just needs to stop.
And now this pair and the other pair he loves. And he doesn't mind the purple glasses. He's just like, they're a little big, aren't they? And I'm like, yeah, but sometimes when you watch on TV, you want full, whatever. So, okay. So, we have a podcast to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's get to that. So if you remember, those of you that are keeping up, season 2, episode 4, the first 3 episodes were about H.H. Holmes. And I said with the last episode that there would be a tie-in. I'm not going to be able to keep it secret like we did with Holmes. I'm going to have to tell you who we're talking about because I need to cover the tie-in first. I'll give you the reasons why people think it's a tie-in, and then we'll debunk the tie-ins. You can make up your own mind. The question is, we're going to be talking about Jack the Ripper. So the question is, could H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper be one and the same? Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I was really excited
about
this.
She wanted an answer from me, and I was like, I'm going to have to hear all the evidence.
Yes. Let me hear the points.
To make my decision.
Let me hear the points. Okay, so I really was excited about doing this, though, because Angie... We did a question and answer one time, and Angie's, the question was, what case would you be most excited to cover? And your answer was Jack the Ripper. So I was really excited when there was a link from what made sense as the first case to do that would then tie into this case for you. And then we were going to follow up with what my favorite case to cover would be, but we may have to put it off because of the Murdaugh stuff. I said I wouldn't cover Murdaugh until after a verdict came in, but there's so much hype around it that I may break my own rule. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the reasons that people do think that H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper are the same person. There's a composite photo of Jack the Ripper, and when compared to an actual photo of H.H. Holmes, there are a lot of similarities. There's a similar face shape. The nose is kind of a thin nose. They both have a fairly robust mustache.
Mm-hmm.
They were of similar build. Here's the problem. Wait, you want me to tell you all the reasons why and then go back and debunk?
Yeah, that's
okay. All right, so that's why people think they could be the same person. That's one of the reasons. Reason number 2, there's a handwritten note. Probably, there were several, but probably the most famous handwritten note from Jack the Ripper went to a news outlet, and it's known as the Dear Boss note. It's actually how the letter starts, Dear Boss. A computer analyzed the handwriting analysis experts said that the Dear Boss letter and a sample of H.H. Holmes' writing were the same. A computer confirmed the experts' findings, saying that the results showed there was a 97.95% chance that Holmes wrote the Dear Boss letter. That's a pretty hearty thing. That's a big possibility, like positively.
Absolutely.
Holmes had a London connection. If you know anything about the Jack the Ripper slayings, you know that he had to have known the Whitechapel community. Holmes had a connection to Whitechapel. Remember we talked about in the first episode covering H.H. Holmes that his parents were from England. He was the first, he and his siblings were the first American born descendants in his family. So he would have still had family in England. I doubt they were going weekly or monthly to visit, but they undoubtedly went back to the homeland to visit family that was still there. But He also had a friend from the University of Michigan by the name of Edmund Buckley. And Buckley actually came from a wealthy Whitechapel family. Buckley and Holmes were partners in crime. They ran some of their insurance scams together in the 1800s. And it seems like there are several occasions where Holmes went back to Whitechapel with Buckley. So he does have a tie-in to that location. Interestingly enough, there is no record of H.H. Holmes being in Chicago or in the United States during the 1888 Whitechapel murder spree.
Okay.
No one can account for his whereabouts during the 1888 murder spree. Holmes obviously had medical knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone that you talk to says that Jack the Ripper had to have some sort of medical knowledge. There was no way that he was just lucky enough to dissect these victims the way he did, and we'll get into that. There are people that believe that Holmes created the Jack the Ripper murder while in London, while in Whitechapel, because the murders in Chicago had made papers around the world. So if he goes there, creates a serial killer there, then the papers are now going to write about that. Some of the heat's going to come off of him. And allegedly, there is proof in Holmes' diary. Things that he said, photocopies in his diary, things that he kept that back up a claim that he apparently made that he was Jack the Ripper. Again, a lot of people made a lot of claims. And remember, when we talked about Holmes, we talked about the fact that he didn't tell the truth. It was very hard for investigators because he would admit to a crime and then say he didn't do it, or he would admit to a crime that they later realized he didn't do, or he would say he had murdered someone that was then walking around. So very difficult to believe anything written in his diary. Okay, so let me debunk those reasons that I just gave you. First of all, the look-alike. When we start looking,
Probably a doggy hair.
That's twice recording the show that I've done that. I bet people are like, what is wrong with that girl?
They're probably thinking, what is in that girl's house?
It's in my coffee. It's extra spices.
It probably is. Truth were known, it's probably extra hair. Extra hairy. Hair of the dog.
Hair of the dog coffee. There are a couple eyewitnesses that saw who they believe to be Jack the Ripper. Here's the thing. While they described him, and it's funny because and we'll get more into this, but one person describes him as very distinguished, a gentlemanly looking person, very well kept, put together. They describe him as a certain height with pale skin, dark hair, and a thin mustache.
You can't not say it that way.
I can't. I'm sorry. It's like now I say garage instead of garage.
Why?
Angela. So I have a friend that's British, and we spend a lot of time together, and she's actually over there right now. She's like another mother to me. And there are words that I've started picking up, and garage is one of them. Yeah.
Just the garage over here at the Garmin house.
The car
garage.
Park. She had to pull into the car park.
Yeah, I have to pull into the parking lot.
Yeah. So, anyways, there are little things that I've started doing. I've started dropping the in front of the hospital. Like if you notice, I no longer say, oh, he was in the hospital. I'll say, oh, well, he was in hospital. Just little things that I have found myself doing. And it's gotten worse since we realized we were English. It has gotten, like I've become a little more obsessed with that part of my ancestry. Anyway, but he was said to have had a very thin mustache.
I just call him mustache.
He had a little worm across here.
He had a little mustache.
Little worm of hair. Anyway, and every picture that we saw of H.H. Holmes, it was a very thick meaty mustache.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that could be easily explained. You can trim a mustache. It's not a big deal. I trim mine every morning. I mean, it's all good.
I just have mine waxed out.
There you go. Bleach that sucker.
It don't come back as easy.
Okay. Debunk number 2. As interesting as those numbers were on the handwriting comparisons, we actually now believe, almost beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Dear Boss letter at least was written by an editor at the Central News Agency of London. Handwriting has been compared to his, the Dear Boss letter was compared to his handwriting, and it's almost identical, so much so that they do believe that that is the person that wrote the letter. Okay, so why would a newspaper write a letter like this claiming to be a serial killer? Well, that's easy. How many more newspapers are you going to sell if you know that the main character in the news is writing to this paper? They're going to jump off the shelves if people think that that murderer has written to that newspaper. So, kind of debunk that. It's hard to debunk that London connection. I mean, we know for a fact that he has connections to London.
Right.
I can get into that a little bit more as we get into the story of Jack the Ripper. No record of homes in Chicago during the crimes. I mean, I can't really debunk that because there's no record. So, it's entirely possible that that's a real deal. Obviously, you can't debunk that Holmes had medical knowledge to perpetrate the Ripper's crimes. He was a doctor. He started his medical career with human dissection. So yes, he did possess that knowledge. You can't argue with that.
Yep.
It makes perfect sense that Holmes would want a creative diversion, so he goes to London and starts these crimes to get his name out of the paper in the States and worldwide. I can't say anything about the diary other than the fact that we do know that Holmes was a habitual liar, so I don't know how much stake we can put in that. So you can debunk some of the bigger claims, but there's also plenty that you cannot debunk.
Right.
So, having said that, let's get on into the...
Let's move into the meat of the story.
All right, so who was Jack the Ripper? That's the big question, right? We're still asking it. It's been, 130 years. We still want to know who this man is. So, London, England, 1888. This all took place in the East End slums. Okay, so not the nice part of town, known as Whitechapel. In the summer, this is just for a little bit of reference, but in the summer of 1888, the population of Whitechapel was approximately 78,000 people crowded into half a square mile. So that is, I got to thinking about that, and for those of us in the South where football's a really big thing, think about your local college team stadium. In our case, both of our team stadiums, respectively, anywhere, depending on the game, anywhere from 80,000 to 85,000 people. Okay, so you're talking about pretty close the same number of people. That game lets out and those people disperse, and for hours, you're sitting in gridlock. This is a lot of people in a little bitty space. The only reason I even point that out is to go undetected is pretty incredible. No, granted, I know that you're doing a lot of your work at night when people are in the bed, but you're also in a very seedy part of town where there's a lot of nightlife moving around. So just think about that. Okay, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
I forgot.
I'm sorry. Well, I need to hush and let you talk. It's your show too.
No.
But it is.
It's not.
It is.
I don't know what I was gonna say.
Okay, well, if you think about it.
If I think about
just
it,
think
I'll
about
just
it,
jump right in.
Yeah, go for it. Okay, so now today, completely opposite situation. Today, Whitechapel is actually a bustling area full of Indian culture. So this is where kind of your Indian, if you know anything, sorry, I'm gonna situate here. If you know anything about London, such a cool place. Although, if you get a chance to go, spend a day in London, but then hit the countryside. That's where it's just amazing. But anyway, London is. We talk about the United States being a melting pot. We have nothing on, like, London is a diverse, and it's so intense, this one population. And so you have, when you go to New York City and you have Soho and you have Chinatown and you have Little Italy, and what's kind of that situation. You have the Middle Easterners that have come and settled there.
Right.
You've got the Jamaicans that have come and settled there. You've got the Asians that have come and settled there. And they're all kind of in their own little thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Whitechapel community kind of was more of where the Indian culture has settled.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got all of these great Indian restaurants. You've got these bars that are going like crazy. And you've got, I knew I was going to lose an earring eventually today. You know, because it's a day that ends in Y. Sorry, guys. Un momento, por favor. There we go. Now I got to get my place back. And then you've got these extremely wealthy homes, like £1,000,000 homes. But nightly, get this, to this day, nightly, one of the biggest businesses in the Whitechapel community are crowds that come in to do tours that tell the gruesome tales of the Whitechapel murders and their villainous leading man, Jack the Ripper. All these years later, that is one of the top businesses in this part of England.
I would still want to do it.
Oh, absolutely.
If I was there.
Well, when you think about it, like Savannah, the big draw in Savannah are the ghost tours.
Right.
And these are stories from lifetimes ago.
Mm-hmm.
But Jack the Ripper is big business in this area. So let's talk a little bit about his crimes. On August 13th, 1888, Polly Nichols, who was also known as Marianne Nichols, 43-year-old prostitute. So, okay, first of all, even like today, that is a very risky profession, okay? They are known to kind of be the part of society that people turn their backs on. You go missing, people are not overly worried about it, really. Now, Mary or Polly, depends on who you were. I know it gets really confusing. Depends on what source you were reading or studying. Some of them call her Polly, some of them call her Annie. I'm going to call her Polly because that's what several of the sources that had great information were. So we're going with Polly, okay? Polly was quite popular in her profession.
Was a worker.
She, well, I don't know.
Or maybe she just had the right tools.
She was doing something right because she was popular. She was drawing a crowd, and she had plenty of customers. But Polly had a drinking problem, and she would drink away her earnings on gin.
Oh,
so
no.
a lot of these prostitutes are homeless. They're not living somewhere as a permanent resident. So they would go to what they would call low lodging houses. Which basically means super inexpensive, and they would pay by the night to lodge there. Well, Polly went to the lodging house, and she had used all of her money to drink, so she didn't have the money to pay for a room that night. So she had been kicked out onto the street. Now, unfortunately to her, this led to her demise. At 3:40 a.m., police walking a beat turned the corner of Bucks Row and found the lifeless body of Polly. Her throat had been cut. She actually had been cut twice. She had one cut about 4 inches long on the left side of her throat, just under her jawline. The second cut was from ear to ear and had sliced all the way down to the spinal cord. Not only stopping her from calling out for help, because obviously he went through the vocal cords, But naturally, this meant that she bled to death quite quickly. She had also been cut across her abdomen so there was a cut down the left side of her abdomen, and it was a really jagged pattern, not what you would expect to see with a scalpel, but more with a knife. So they were able to realize that this was a knife cut, not a blade cut. And it left her intestines exposed within her body. She had been mutilated in and around her genitalia area.
Okay.
So I want to point out here, again, there's a lot of comparison of H.H. Holmes to Jack the Ripper. We don't have a lot of record of the brutality that H.H. Holmes put his victims through, mainly because we don't have the bodies. The bodies weren't really left to be found. We never could trust him to actually say what he had done. But for H.H. Holmes, the motive always seemed to be money.
Right.
For Jack the Ripper, he's killing what most people consider the dregs of society. There would be no money involved in this.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. Most of the time, serial killers don't change their MO, their method of operandi. Modus operandi. Yes. Their method of operation. So they don't normally change that, and I thought it was interesting that for one, it would be clearly, for Jack the Ripper, it wasn't even about the murder. It was the sexual gratification that he got from mutilating the body after the death. So that stood out to me as a main difference. Much of the hype and frenzy around the Whitechapel murders was caused by a new newspaper company trying to make a name for itself. And what better way to sell papers than to sell horror? This newspaper was called The Star. It is not in any way affiliated with the Star paper that is a big syndicated paper in England now.
Okay.
But the Star actually decided to sensationalize because there had been 2 murders.
Jojo.
I know, right? There had been 2 murders of prostitutes prior to finding Polly's body. And the Star decided that they were going to connect all 3 of these murders, even though they didn't really have anything to connect them, any means by which to connect them. So they said, hey, we can sensationalize these murders of prostitutes, so it was obvious that the crimes were not related. And they reported that Polly was the 3rd victim of a prostitute killer, not the first victim of a madman. Now, hang on to that because we are going to readdress that later.
Okay.
The first victim was prostitute Martha Tabram. We're going to come back to Martha because there actually is newer information.
I'm sorry. Hold on.
You want me to hold on to, or am I still going?
You can still go.
Okay. But Martha was stabbed to death 39 times with a bayonet, presumably by a soldier. The second prostitute killed was beaten to death by 3 assailants. The paper realized that if they tried to tie the 3 murders together, that paper sales would skyrocket, and that's exactly what they did, and that was exactly the result that they got. So, Polly's death's been all in the paper. Now, we go to September 8th, 1880. That should be 88. I don't know why I said 80. It should be 88. I apologize. September 8th, 1888, 47-year-old prostitute Annie Chapman's body was found mutilated on Hanbury Street on the back road of Whitechapel. Again, she had a slice in her throat that her abdomen was decimated, and the trauma to her genitalia left little question that she had met the same murderer as Polly Nichols. However, Annie's uterus had also been removed. Annie was last seen between 5 and 5:30 a.m. on Hanbury Street, being accompanied by a gentleman described as having a shabby, genteel appearance. An eyewitness overhears a conversation between Annie and the man that is believed to be an argument of a sexual encounter. Annie's body was located in the backyard of what can best be described as a multiplex. And you can go online and see these pictures. And guys, I promise there's coming a time when I figure out how to put this up on the video so you can see it as we're going through it. But what you have are these two housing complexes with entrances here and here. And in the middle is a singular walkway that leads to the backyard of these multiplexes. Okay? So someone overhears Annie and this man, and he hears the man say, well, will you? He doesn't explain what will you what means. I don't know if he didn't hear that. He just assumed that her being a prostitute, will you perform a service? And Annie says, sure. And the two take off down this pathway to the backyard of this multiplex. So essentially what that means is Annie and her murder had to walk together through this covered walkway to the backyard of what Annie perceived to be a rendezvous, but the Ripper had murder on his mind. Now records show that Annie's death occurred, get this, remember, because we said she was last seen at between 5 and 5:30. This is in the summer months, okay? So records show that Annie's death occurred in the daylight on a bright summer morning, not under the cover of darkness as one would presume. It was a high-risk location because there were so many people that lived in those two buildings and shared that backyard. Yeah. And it was daylight. Plus, there was only one way in and one way out of this backyard. So Albert Kadash lived in the neighboring building. So it was 57, I believe, and 59, or 27 and 29. He lived in 27. She was murdered in the backyard of the 29 building. He lived in 27. He was kind of having some issues with his health. So he actually comes downstairs and exits through the backyard to the toilet. It was an outhouse. Of course, 1888. It's an outhouse. And he goes to the bathroom and he hears a woman on the other side of the fence say no as he's heading back inside. Well, he barely makes it back up the steps and needs to go back to the bathroom. So he comes out again, uses the bathroom. And this time as he's leaving, heading back to the building, he hears this thud. Well, he doesn't think a lot about it because a lady that lives in the 29 building owns a wood packing business. So he just thinks that she's over there doing something and thuds something against the fence. Well, now we know the thud that he heard was actually Annie's body landing against the fence as she had died. She hit the dividing fence. At 6 a.m., John Davis comes out of the building to use the bathroom, and he discovers Annie's body. So I want to take a moment, though, to discuss Annie Chapman. Often in the telling of Jack the Ripper stories, the victims get overlooked because they're simply described as prostitutes. The thing about these women is that they had lives outside of being prostitutes. Right. They weren't just prostitutes. Most of these women had been wives and mothers that for one reason or another had become destitute and were left to sell their bodies to survive. I'll give you Annie's story. On May 1st of 1869, Annie Mary Jones and James Chapman marry at All Saints Church in the Knightsbridge district of London. Excuse me, his name was John James. I apologize. John is a coachman employed in the service of a nobleman. Okay. So not a shabby job. Right. They're not, I mean, granted, they're not going to the big parties at the palace.
Yeah, but
it was an honorable position that he held.
I guess that's what I was looking for.
The couple had 3 children. They had Emily Ruth, Annie Georgina, and John Alfred. Now, John was born with a disability, and so he was not able to live in their home. He had to live in a institution for the physically disabled.
And was that mandatory back then?
I think it was just that they couldn't really care for
Okay.
him. It may have been mandatory, but I got the impression that it was just that his disability was so severe that they couldn't
Okay.
care for him, and he did better in
Okay.
a group home where he could be cared for. So at the age of 12, and the son would have been 2 or 3 at this point. So you've already got this family that's feeling terrible because they can't take care of the child. They've had to put him in this institution. At the age of 12, their eldest child, Emily, dies of meningitis.
Huh.
Yeah. So the distress of losing Emily and having to raise John in an institution was enough to wear the pair down, and both turned to drinking. The English would say they turned to drink. They didn't start drinking, they just turned to drink. But
before long, Jennifer's going to speak with a completely British accent.
I'm going to do the whole Madonna thing.
She's gonna do
and
it.
one day I'm just going to, yep.
And I'm still going to be over here country.
Well, I'm still going to sound like a swanky, honky-tonky British girl. Fun story, though. I was over there a couple of years ago, and I was there for 2 weeks. I had gone with my mom. You know, I have my mom, and then I have my friend that is British, who, like I said, is another mother to me, but she's my mom. And we were over in a little town. It was really cool because I got to see the whole countryside and the small towns, and it's beautiful. I didn't just get to see England. I'd done England before.
Right.
This was a chance to see the countryside. And we're in this little town, and she was going to have her hair cut because she still maintains a home over there, and her brother's there, and her mom was there, and you know, all these family and friends there. So she was like, "You go enjoy yourself. I'm going to go have a haircut." I said, "Okay." It was so cold, and rainy, and I really just wanted a good cup of coffee. Well, I'm in England, and they do love their coffee, but they drink tea. So I'm looking, and I want a coffee shop that's got Wi-Fi because I just need to check in on the world here across the pond. And there's this police officer directing traffic out in the rain. Poor soul. And he sees me, and I'm walking around like... And I must have really looked like a fish out of water because he finally says, "Hello, ma'am. Can I help you?" And I was like, well, I'm just looking for the best coffee spot in town. And he goes, "American." And I was like, yeah. Well, he wasn't British. He was from South America, which, South America, listen to me. He was from South Africa, which... the accent's very similar because South Africa, the British settled that and everything. But anyway, point being, super cool guy. But he has me stand in the rain and talk to him because I'm a little country hick girl.
He said that?
He didn't call me that. He said
I was going to say, wow, he did speak English.
It was a delightful accent.
Is that what he said?
Mm-hmm.
We should move over here and listen to all of us talk.
I have a delightful accent. So I stood in the rain, freezing my southern whatever off. But he had a cool accent too, so it was all good. I did finally get a great cup of coffee.
There you go.
Sidetrack much? Okay. So anyway, they've lost this child. She turns to drink. They both turn to drink. And it leads to divorce. But John actually says, "You know what? We couldn't make a go of it. Life got tough. I will continue to provide for you financially." So he did. Up until 1886, when he passed away.
Okay.
So they divorce. He's still providing for her financially. She's able to live the life she's accustomed to. Da, 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 da. Then he dies. She has no skills. She's not been trained at anything. What does she do with no skills? She sells the one thing she knows to sell to make money, and that's her body. So that's how she survives. So it's not just like she said, "Oh, you know what?
I'm just going to run out here and be a prostitute."
I don't really want to work. I mean, I guess technically that's work, but I don't want to hold a job. I'll sell my body and be a prostitute. That wasn't what she said. It's what life handed her, and she did what she felt like she had to do. No, I'm not saying prostitution's great. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it helped me to see that there was a human, sad story
Right.
behind these women ending up on the street. Okay, so for several weeks, there's actually no action in the Whitechapel murders. It's very quiet. And there was no news to report, so newspaper sales fell off, right? But on September 27th, a letter arrived to the Central News Office and was addressed to the boss, and we've talked about that. The letter was written in what can only be described as blood red ink, and you can actually see a copy of this letter online, and the ink is extremely red.
You think it really was blood?
No, it was ink, but it
fit the bill.
When they say blood red ink, they meant it. So the letter reads, "Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they looked so clever and talked about being on the right track. That joke about leather apron gave me real fits. I'll explain. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work, and I want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over this last job to write with, but it went thick like glue, and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha ha." He literally wrote out, "Ha ha." "The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for the jollies, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work. Then give it out straight. My knife is so knife and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha." So he was planning to write in blood, but the blood got too thick.
Right. And so he wants them to think he's a doctor, or he wants them to
so
not?
here it says, so they say I'm a doctor now, ha ha, which makes it sound to me like you're on the wrong track.
Mm-hmm.
But would you not try to throw them off track?
Right.
So, couple of things that's very interesting about the letter, though. First of all, he gave himself the name Jack the Ripper. Mm-hmm. They had called him Leather Apron. They got in a lot of trouble for this. The reason they called him Leather Apron was because at the second murder, there was a bloody leather apron found off to the side. Mm-hmm. The problem was one of the guys that lived in the multiplex was a butcher. Mm-hmm. And wore a leather apron, and it was covered in blood from him butchering the meat.
Right.
He was known around Whitechapel by the nickname Leather Apron. People did not call him by his given name. They called him Leather Apron. So he goes to the newspaper and he's like, "It ain't me. You owe me this much money or I'm suing you for slander." Mm-hmm. And so they never use that again. Yeah. But suddenly you get the nickname Jack the Ripper.
Oh, goodness.
So there's that. Also, I think it's interesting. So we said that we feel like one of maybe the editors wrote, and they feel pretty certain that one of the editors wrote this letter, right? But interestingly enough, we know that someone with a lot of intelligence wrote it because it is so well written. Come here. Okay, you just want to be petted. Okay. It's so well written that we know that... Well, come here. Excuse me. You gotta come here if you want me to get you, silly Ed. Okay, so we know that someone with a lot of intelligence wrote it because the punctuation's correct. Oh, thank you. I'm getting my kisses. The punctuation is correct. The spelling is correct. The grammar is good. So it is.
I was
Okay.
trying to get the other one to come over here
Okay.
to me.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Sweet kisses. Thanks, babe. So you know that you're dealing with someone that's pretty intelligent. Then they give themselves the nickname Jack the Ripper. They make the comment about the doctor. But the thing that I thought was interesting, and I think it can be explained, but they make the comment about the ears. On the next one, I shall cut the ears off and send it to the editor. We haven't seen him mutilate the ears, right? Well, now you start seeing him mutilate the ears.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, people go, well, then obviously it was Jack the Ripper. But if you're Jack the Ripper and you're reading the newspaper, and obviously he's literate, you're reading the newspaper, and you see that someone is pretending to be you, saying they're going to cut the ears off, what are you going to do? Okay, I'll cut the ears. That's fine with me. I don't care. Right? Okay.
I guess.
I don't know. So much of this is speculation on my part, and I apologize. So, once again, newspaper sales skyrocket, leading many to wonder if the letter was in fact real or a sales gimmick by an unscrupulous employee. On September 3rd, 1881, at 1 a.m., 40-year-old Swede Elizabeth Stride's body was discovered on Berner Street in Dutfield's Yard in Whitechapel. Within 45 minutes and less than a mile away in Mitre Square, a second victim, Catherine Eddowes' body was discovered by police. Both ladies had experienced a gruesome end at the hands of Jack the Ripper. But here's the interesting thing. With the Stride murder, Israel Swartz was walking along Berner Street behind a man, and he noticed the man strike up a conversation with Elizabeth Stride. Then he tries to pull her into the street. She resists. He assumes that it's a lover's quarrel, and he flees because he doesn't want to get involved in whatever's going on. But as he runs off, Swartz catches a glimpse of the man who we now believe was Jack the Ripper. He described the man as being around 30 years old, about 5 feet 5 inches tall, with a fair complexion, dark hair, and a brown mustache.
I guess maybe I had always imagined him to be a little older than that.
Right. And I do think, although what we know about serial killers is about the age that we see that. But I'm like you, it seemed to me, and I think it was because of the precision of the cuts and things like that, you did feel like he would have been a little more advanced.
Right.
He goes on to say that the man was wearing a dark jacket with a black peaked cap. Now, this is the first description that we have of Jack the Ripper. And once alone with Elizabeth, the Ripper drags her into Dutfield's Yard and slashes her throat. However, her body is not mutilated. The fact that she escaped such brutality was the first of two victims in one night, leads many to believe that the murder was interrupted. So when we dive a little deeper, we realize there was a club within Dutfield's Yard, and the steward was believed to have pulled his horse and cart into the yard and interrupted the mutilation, leaving the Ripper sexually frustrated and looking for another victim. So he makes his way to the dingy maze of alleyways that makes up Mitre Square, and the fate of Catherine Eddowes is sealed. What we know is, like I said, this is about an hour later and about half a mile. It doesn't take an hour to walk half a mile.
Yeah.
So, keep that in mind. Joseph Lavender is leaving a club on Duke Street around 1:30 in the morning, and Lavender tells police that at 1:35 he sees a man and a woman talking to each other on the corner of Duke Street and Church Passage. And this is across the road from where he is, so roughly 10 yards. The woman had her back to Lavender, but he's a great view of the man, and he describes him as approximately 30 years old, between 5'7" and 5'8" inches tall, 5 feet 7 or 8 inches tall. Fair complexion, small, fair mustache. So again, we've got two people describing who we assume to be the same person as having a thin mustache, not that thick mustache that we saw in Holmes. And then a salt and pepper jacket with a gray peaked cap and a red neckerchief and an overall shabby appearance. Now remember, this is twice that he's been described as kind of not super well kept. The only difference between the two eyewitness descriptions are the clothing. And since experts have already established that the Ripper was very familiar with the Whitechapel community, it may be a simple explanation of him residing in the area, having blood on his clothes from the first murder, running home and changing clothes, and then going back out and running into Catherine and committing the second murder. And this would make, like I said, make perfect sense if there was blood on his clothes from the first murder. He wouldn't want to walk around town. Obviously, still a lot of activity going on.
Yeah.
He wouldn't want to walk around town with blood on his clothes.
Right.
Apparently angered by being interrupted with Elizabeth and not being able to mutilate her. He was particularly brutal with Catherine. He made a deep slash across her nose. You can look up the autopsy pictures if you're not squeamish. It's very gruesome. He makes the deep slash across her nose, cuts both eyelids, and makes several cuts around her mouth. This seems to be a deliberate attempt to disfigure her face. Then he cuts her breast from the bone. He cuts her from breastbone to pelvic bone, I apologize, and skillfully removes her bowels and places them across her body above her right shoulder.
Wow.
Not really sure. Didn't cut them out, but just reposition them to across the shoulder.
It's all weird.
Yeah. It was as if the killer was posing the body and its contents. Now, this is a new level of violence shown by Jack the Ripper. The left kidney was also removed, and several sources state that the uterus was moved from the victim as well. Also, there were cuts made along the ears, and we had never seen that before. So in the previous victims, we saw the body mutilated, but not the face. Now we're seeing facial mutilation as well. November 9th, 1888, in Miller's Court, a cheap lodging house. Excuse me.
The puppies are tearing up her shoes.
Sorry, guys. I actually like these. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
They tend to do that.
I like these shoes, so I am going to stop
I've been
you.
watching them for a few minutes, and they've just been having a little.
And I'm just oblivious to it. Normally I would let them just play with them, but I do like these shoes. They're super comfortable. So.
I would buy you a new pair.
Buy me a new pair. Okay. So Miller's Court is a cheap lodging house, and on the 9th of 1888, the body of a young woman was discovered slaughtered. This is actually the youngest victim that we see, and this was the only murder to take place inside.
Okay.
So what happened is this offers the Ripper the privacy and time that he wants to inflict maximum amount of pain and damage. Okay, so again, this anger seems to be prevalent in this murder, and unlike the other murders, the terror was recorded by crime scene photos. This is the first time that a photographer is sent out with police to record the gruesome scene, and it is gruesome. And you can tell that he had all the time in the world. I'm gonna have to put a disclaimer on this. I forgot to say it earlier, but if you get squeamish, this is not the episode for you to listen to, and that's why I'm trying to knock it out in one episode. So I know it's long. I apologize. Want to knock it out in one. So, and even if we break it up into 2 parts from this one video, let's knock it out in one, and that be that. So anyway, with this young lady, the body was eviscerated, the face was cut beyond recognition with gashes on the nose, cheeks, and the ears being partially removed. The eyebrows and lips had been cut, and once again, the neck was cut straight down the spine, with 2 of the vertebrae actually being notched out by the knife. The breast had been cut off of the body, the internal organs had been removed. This victim was 25-year-old prostitute Mary Jane Kelly. Mary Jane had married at around 16 years of age to a coal miner who was killed in a mining explosion 3 years after their marriage. After this marriage, the press scrambled to figure out who this monster could be. After first denying that it was an Englishman, saying that an Englishman could never commit such acts of horror, the press blamed it on a Jew. Remember, this is still a time of great racism. They blame it on a Jew. It has to be a foreigner. All of these things. But now the newspapers were actually forced to face the fact that not only did it appear that the murderer was an Englishman, but also that he was part of their upper class. Now, found that interesting because keep in mind we have 3 descriptions that say he was kind of shabby. But again, if you're trying to fit in the slums, you're not going to go around looking like an English gentleman.
Right.
You're going to want to try to disguise yourself a little bit. If these notes were in fact written by Jack the Ripper, then it's obvious that he's educated just by the tone. The fact that he would cut these bodies and dissect them, removing the parts with such precision, it wasn't a hack job, lets us know that obviously he's educated somewhat on the body. So now they're having to face some fears that really get to the heart of the country. Then everyone, like I said, everyone is talking about the precision and clean cuts, the clean removal of the organs, and that they were certain that the murderer was either a medical student or a doctor. Okay, keep this in mind. This is at a time when house calls are still a real thing. Doctors grab their doctor bags, they roam the streets, they travel to see their patients. Okay, there are a lot of doctors that were almost lynched trying to get to their patients because they had their medical bags. They said they needed police protection to go visit their own patients.
Wow.
So, interestingly enough, if you think about the image that we're familiar with of Jack the Ripper, he's almost always in a top hat and has a doctor's bag with him. Think about the images that you see, the drawn images.
Yeah.
So there were actually several real-life suspects. There was Aaron Kaminsky, a Polish Jew at the lower end of the social ladder. There was very little evidence against him. Let me tell you what the evidence they did have against Aaron was. Aaron lived in the Whitehall community. He was Jewish. He did have some mental issues, voices in his head, things like that. But Aaron didn't have the education that I would think you would need.
Right.
And then I lost my spot. Let's get back. But Aaron did live in the area. And there were several things. He did actually end up going away for the mental illnesses that he dealt with. But I just don't know that he had the knowledge to A, write a letter like that, to B, desecrate and dissect a body the way it was done. So then there was John Druitt, and Aaron also was not upper middle class. John Druitt, an upper middle class Englishman and a barrister, an Oxford graduate who committed suicide by throwing himself into the River Thames. He was considered a person of interest. And then after he committed suicide, of course, everyone was like, oh, well, that's That's that. He's guilty. Um, Also, no more murders occurred after his death, which was the prime reason he was so interesting as a suspect. Then there was Francis Tumblety, whose listed occupation is as a medical quack. And he is rumored to have had a collection of pickled uteruses, which made him quite the interesting suspect. The fact that he was also homosexual made him easy prey, as at that time...
He was almost homosexual?
He wasn't almost. That he was also a
Also,
homosexual.
I thought you said almost.
I think I did say almost, but it's not almost.
Like...
He was also a homosexual, which made him easy prey, because at that time homosexuality was illegal, and the homosexual community was blamed for a lot of the nefarious events that occurred. He did have medical knowledge. He was an Englishman. Or, excuse me, he was American, but he spent a lot of time in England. So, sorry, he was American. Then you had famed painter Walter Sickart, who was openly obsessed with Jack the Ripper and the murders, and he even claimed to have stayed in a lodge where the serial killer had stayed. This event caused him to paint the room that he was in and title it Jack the Ripper's bedroom. This fascination led people to believe that Walter was either Jack the Ripper or was the Ripper's accomplice. There are a lot of people that believe that there was an accomplice. If you put an accomplice into play, then any of these suspects then can become more interesting.
Right.
The first guy that we talked about, who is probably the leading suspect for most people, but had no medical background.
Right.
Well, maybe he was just the guy that found them.
Maybe he had a friend who had medical background.
So if you have a friend that has medical background, then suddenly he becomes a whole lot more interesting as a suspect. Okay. Then there was Sir William Gull. Sir William Gull was the personal physician to Queen Victoria. He was also questioned as possibly being Jack the Ripper. However, this seems quite unlikely, as Gull would have been up in age and said to be hemiplegic by the time of the murder. Okay. So how would he flee from the police? You know, things like that. And then probably the most well-known person of interest was Prince Albert Edward, the Duke of Clarence and the Prince of Wales' son and Queen Victoria's grandson. He was said to be unbalanced mentally and possessed unusual sexual proclivities. This seemed to be enough to make him a person of interest. It is worth noting that there was little to no evidence linking most of these men to the murders. Now, I want to touch back on Martha Tabor, and if you remember, she was the first prostitute killed. She was stabbed 39 times by the bayonet, so they assumed that a soldier killed her. That assumption comes from the fact that Martha and a friend, now Martha was another one that had been in a great situation. She's married with 5 children. Her husband starts an affair, I believe, with the nanny. There's a separation. She is left with no money, so she turns to selling her body to survive. Martha and a friend take on 2 soldiers. They take them into this location and do what prostitutes do with these gentlemen. And then she ends up dead with all these stab wounds. Again, they think it's a bayonet. Martha was stabbed from the front. All of the Ripper victims were stabbed from the back. It is now believed that Martha was the Ripper's first victim, that he learned a lot of lessons from stabbing Martha and changed to make his murders easier to complete. The thing with Martha is our first gentleman that we talk about, Aaron, that we said just had some mental problems, lower class citizen. Aaron lived across the street from where Martha was murdered. And most serial killers create their first murder very close to their home. So because of that now being linked as another victim of the first victim of Jack the Ripper, he kind of goes back up in his esteem as far as could he have done it. Again, my question is, then where does the education come in? Where does the writing in such a fine fashion come in? Where does the knowledge of the body come in?
Right.
And things like that. But that is what I've got for you. I'm so excited that we got it done in one. But that's what I got for you.
I love
on
it.
Jack the Ripper. I really thought it was going to be like a 10-parter because there's so much lore around it. But when you kind of start picking that out and get to the guts of it, it's pretty streamlined. The biggest lore is that we don't know who did it.
Yeah.
For sure.
I don't know that we ever will.
I don't know that we ever will either.
I mean, we've been wondering for years now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're no closer, I don't believe.
I think that there are things that give you much more well-rounded suspects.
Sorry.
But I don't think you're ever going to be able to definitively exclude a person or include a person.
Right.
Just my opinion. So.
Come on, let's go.
Okay. So, I don't know where we go next because we may break and bring you guys some Murdaugh stuff. Or we may jump into my favorite murder, which is also unsolved.
My favorite murder.
My favorite murder. And you guys feel free to contact us and let us know what you want us to cover. There are a lot of you that have access to getting in touch with us through Facebook or through text. Feel free to do that. I'm going to give you a couple of ways to get in touch with us, though. Unfortunately, I have to pull them up because I'm crazy. I know you.
Don't give them too many ways.
I know, right?
They might
But
be after me.
you can contact us at 3mpodcastgals@gmail.com. That's one way you can get in touch with us. Let me pull this one up. So that's our email. Or you can contact us. Oh, it's going to take forever to pull up. JoJo's on it. She knows where to contact us. She's like, yeah, right here, right here. You can contact us on Facebook. But now I gotta find that. I think it's Mayhem Murder and the Macabre podcast
I think so.
on Facebook. So you can contact us that way. And then if you go to the Podbean, follow us on Podbean. There's a place where you can get in touch with us. And then, of course, also on the YouTube channel, the YouTube channel, you can also comment there. So let us know what your interest is if you want in
Okay,
Murdaugh.
so we aren't gonna we did a 1-part Jack the Ripper.
I know, I'm so excited. I know, it's over an hour. I'm sorry, Philip. Really cool thing about YouTube is that they have this pause button. So you can actually watch 30 minutes of it and pause it and then watch the other 30 minutes later. And I find it funny that anybody says anything about that because the people that I know that get on YouTube are on there for hours at a time.
Yeah.
And they will watch documentaries and whatnot hours
Oh my goodness,
at
I'm
a time.
so sorry.
They're
Yes,
excited about this.
They really apparently are, and I'm not as excited for them to throw their voices out there.
It's all good. It's all good. So, we're going to wrap it up, though.
All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us again tonight. And let us know if you have any fun and funky information on the Murdaugh trial.
Or any of the cases that we've covered.
Or any of the cases that we covered.
You may know something that we need to know.
Yeah.
So, I'd love to hear it.
Come back with us next week.
Yep. Stay safe. Be good to one another. We'll see you next week, guys.